could we be given warning at the beginning of a programme if there's going to be anything about the Beatles, as all Beatle fans can make sure to listen, and have a chance to ring up other fans to make sure they are also listening.
Hi everybody, this is John here. This is Paul, George
and Ringo.
And we're very happy to be on your programme once again.
Hey everybody, this is Steve Marinucci, and to put it mildly, I am very excited about this show. Very, very excited. We have two big things on the show today. First of all, we have a panel discussion on the book, A Woman's History of the Beatles by Christine Feldman Barrett, with the author and three Beatles scholars that you know, Dr. Kit O'Toole, Susan Ryan, and Candy Leonard. And even though I'm here, I stay out of the discussion. It's their talk, not mine. But it's a great book, by the way. It's not just about the screaming. I realize when we're talking about female Beatle fans, that's the first thing some people think of. But this is a book that goes into both sides of Beatle fandom for women, talking about the fans themselves, and also talking about the group. The group had a lot of respect for Beatles. Second part, we have a Zoom call with Dan Geller and Dayna Goldfine, the co-directors of the new Peter Asher Everywhere Man movie. It's a great movie. We really, really enjoyed it. And we will talk about the making of the movie in the discussion. So we have a lot to say, a lot to see, and we hope you'll stick around with us because we'll even have some Beatles News Briefs for you. So here we go. We have a special panel discussion on the book, A Woman's History of the Beatles by Christine Feldman Barrett. This is a worldwide, international Zoom call today. Christine is in Australia and it's Thursday morning.
Yes.
How are you doing, Christine?
Does that mean she can predict the future?
Maybe.
She lives in the future.
She lives in the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
I'm always one step ahead, I guess.
Say something about you and what you've been up to and just give us a little background.
As you can hear, I'm not originally from Australia. I landed here about almost 15 years ago now, which is wild to think about. But I came here for work, so I consider myself a youth culture historian with a focus on popular music. And because I've been a Beatles fan since I was a little girl, the Beatles have always been present in whatever I've been doing, whether it was playing in indie rock bands at university while I was studying, or obviously a lot later on with graduate school, starting to look into the Beatles in different ways. But I ended up getting a job here at Griffith University in Brisbane in 2011, and I'm technically in the sociology group here, but the work that I do really is interdisciplinary, so it's across sociology, media studies, which is actually my PhD is in communication, and then also I would say history, cultural history. So it straddles those areas. And writing A Women's History of the Beatles was a project I had thought about for a long time, probably since about 2013, but I even had conversations about writing a book like this. I don't know that the idea was that fixed at the time, but I remember talking with my sister, who's also a massive Beatles fan, and in fact that was very formative for us as we were growing up. So I had talked with her about it probably as early as 2005, but I was still working on my PhD at that time, so I couldn't really just venture off and do something completely different. But in any case, the opportunity arose to do this book, to work on the book, put in a book proposal, and that was probably around 2018. And then I got the contract with Bloomsbury Academic to write the book. The hardback edition came out in 2021 in February, so it's been 5 years since it came out.
Okay. Candy Leonard and I have known each other God knows how long. She's been part of this podcast for a long time.
Wow.
She's the author of the highly acclaimed book, Beatles, How the Beatles and Their Fans Remade the World, the first socio-cultural analysis of the entire Beatle phenomenon, centering first-generation fans in the Beatles story, paving the way for other authors, especially women, to consider the fan perspective. The book is really a classic, and folks, if you do not have it, you need to get it now.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. When I hearing, like, as we're talking and thinking about how much time has gone by, it's blowing my mind. And I like to think of my book not as old, but as classic. So thank you for that. And also timeless in that the way I told the story was that it's like you are there, right? In other words, like the reader knows only what the fans knew along that 6-year timeline. So it's never dated because it's like it's a time machine anyway, so it's never dated. So I appreciate your nice remarks about the book.
Next, in the Big Apple, is Susan Ryan, who's been a Beatle expert for 50 years. She's a native New Yorker, and she's done numerous Beatles events, including the 2018 White Album Symposium at Monmouth University, the 2019 Abbey Road Anniversary Symposium at the Eastman School of Music, and she was MC of the 2019 Beatles Symposium at the Ridge Festival in Walnut Ridge, Arkansas, and the Kinsale Beatles Festival in Kinsale, Ireland. She co-authored with David Bedford and Richard Porter the book The Beatles' Fab Four Cities, and is co-host of the travel DVD John Lennon's New York, published in 2007. She's been on the staff of the annual Fest for Beatle fans for the last 26 years, where she originated and moderates the Beatles Historians panel and is proprietor and tour guide for Fab Four NYC walking tours and escorted walk around New York City Beatles sites. Hello, Susan.
Hi, Steve. It's good to see you. It's been a long time since we've seen each other at all.
Yes.
I'm very glad to be here and included in this illustrious company. I'm proud to have been a part of Christine's book and also part of Candy's book, and appeared on panels and discussions with Kit many times. So I know all these ladies very well, and proud to be here and looking forward to a really interesting and fun discussion today. I think we're going to have a really good time talking about women and the Beatles, as it were. So I think we'll have a lot of fun.
Yes. And finally, in the great city of Chicago is Dr. Kit O'Toole, the author of Songs We Were Singing, Guided Tours Through the Beatles' Lesser Known Tracks, and Michael Jackson FAQ, All That's Left to Know About the King of Pop. She also co-edited The Act You've Known All These Years, The Beatles and Fandom, with Beatles historian Kenneth Womack. She is also the co-host of two popular podcasts, Talk More Talk, a solo Beatles videocast, and Toppermost of the Poppermost. In addition, she teaches courses on the history of music through Monmouth University, and when she has time, she appears on this show, and I can't believe she's so busy. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Steve. I'm just thrilled to be here, and as Susan said, with such an illustrious group. I know everybody here. I've been on panels with you guys. Christine, you interviewed me for your book. It's just a wonderful community.
We went to a roadhouse together.
That's right. We went to, that's in Mississippi. Went to a juke joint.
I was thinking about that recently because of the sad passing of Ivor Davis, who was with us.
Yeah. What a time that was. Yeah, really, it is. And Steve, I will never forget when I first met you in person at the Los Angeles Fest of Beatles Fans, and you were so complimentary about a presentation I had done, Top 10 Beatles Sounds That Changed the World, and you wrote about it on your blog, and that helped spread the word about my presentations. So I've never forgotten that.
You know, I've been going through my archives and stuff recently, and some of the things I wrote, I actually do not remember doing. So many things back then, and I'm looking at some of the stuff, I go, did I really write that? And I did. It's wow. I can't believe some of the stuff that I've done. And I've got some of it online. But yeah, I can't believe all the stuff that I've done. And then there was things we said today with Ken and Alan. And as of you have mentioned, Candy, Susan, and Kit are in Christine's book. And that's one of the reasons they're here, because they were very much part of the book. I'm going to start, Christine, with you and talked about what made the book happen. Could you just go into that a little more? Because I remember writing a story way back in the beginning days when I was doing Beatles Examiner about female fans of the Beatles and how, and I have to confess, it was about the screaming and that kind of stuff. You went into the whole thing a lot differently than I did. You talked about the group's relationship with the fans, and they actually did. They really cared about the fans. And you also talked about how the Beatles women, how they were affected, how the music industry was affected, which is really taking all that in an envelope. That's a much wider subject than just the Beatles had female fans. They really affected women a lot deeper, in a much larger way than I could ever have figured. Wouldn't you say? Explain some of that.
I would say that really the seed that started the whole thing, and I would say this is putting aside my own interest as a girl and a teenage young woman being interested in the Beatles as a second generation fan. The seed of the project really was a fluke in a way. It was a great fluke, but I happened to be spending the summer of 2002 in Berlin with some of my relatives over there. And I was watching German TV one day. I wasn't watching TV a lot when I was over there, so that's why this is really a fluke. But I happened to turn on the TV one day, and there was a documentary on where some women were being interviewed, and they were being interviewed in German, and I speak and understand German, but I could tell that the women being interviewed were not native German speakers. They had an accent that you would attribute to English speakers of some kind. So as the interview progressed, all of a sudden there was a little subtitle saying who was being interviewed. And it turned out to be a woman who was in a band called the Liverbirds. I had never heard of this band before. And as the documentary footage progressed, they didn't have filmed footage of the Liverbirds, or maybe they did. I was just so fascinated by this story that I had never heard about before, where these young women in Liverpool not only wanted to be in a band because of the Beatles, because they had gone to the Cavern and seen them play and had some interactions with them, but they ended up following the Beatles' footsteps and going to Hamburg and playing music there and becoming quite successful within West Germany at that time. And one of them still lives there to this day, married a German musician, stayed on. But I just couldn't believe that I had never heard this story before, because being a young woman who had played in bands, who thought she was pretty across obscure 60s bands, I still hadn't heard of the Liverbirds before. And it occurred to me, gosh, there's so many women in music that have some sort of connection to the Beatles, maybe not as specific as this one or as close as this one. But the Beatles have certainly influenced a lot of women musicians, and there have been other bands, I'm pretty sure, I was just going on this hunch, probably other British and American bands that were led by women, or were all women, who had formed bands. And then, of course, later I found out that the Pleasure Seekers, which was the band featuring the Quattro sisters, including Susie Quattro, they had been formed because I interviewed Patty for the book, and she talked about the fact that they had seen the Beatles when they came to Detroit in 1964 and said, that's it. I want to do this with my sisters and my girlfriends. I want it to be an all-girl thing. So I thought that was a really great line of inquiry to follow, this whole idea of women making music because the Beatles were so influential, because there had been already all this commentary and all these stories about people like Bruce Springsteen and all these other male musicians who would point to the Ed Sullivan Show as a point of departure for them becoming musicians, or an entry point. And so I knew for sure that if I was going to write a book about this topic, that one chapter would be devoted to women in music. So that was, besides the whole fan story, which I feel is so important, because when I was growing up and I loved the Beatles, and I felt there was nothing wrong with being a girl who loved the Beatles, there had never been anything wrong with that. And yet, at an early age, I would see footage at Beatlefest when I was 8, 9 years old, and elsewhere, wherever I could find it, or I would read magazine articles. There was so much dismissiveness around the female fans, even though they had really in many ways been directly responsible for the Beatles' success. We can talk about all the other factors, of course, but they played such a huge role in making the Beatles the cultural phenomenon that they became. And so I really wanted to flip the script and say, we can talk about, and other scholars like, oh, her name is just flying out of my mind right now, but there's a famous piece that's written about how Beatlemania was the gateway for
Barbara Ehrenreich.
Yes.
Barbara Ehrenreich, thank you. But that Beatlemania was the gateway for second wave feminism, and they make a really strong argument for that. So I read that piece when I was in my PhD program, I think, and that really made an impact on me. And I thought, yes, that's one way to look at it, but I also want to dig into the stories about the agency that Beatlemania gave girls, adolescent girls, teenage girls at the time, and how that led to so many important things in their lives: friendships, the way they saw the world, travel opportunities, an interest in cultural history of the UK, all these other things that became defining aspects to their young lives. And then I wanted to, of course, see how that differed with different generations. So my generation, yeah.
And you get into all of that in the book. It really goes back to the Cavern, of course. And I just talked to Debbie Greenberg, and that book, Cavern Club, The Inside Story, is really an essential volume in everybody's library because of what she says and the detail about going into the cavern and being in the cavern. The whole cavern experience is there.
Yes.
But it all starts there. And I'm going to ask you guys to jump in here.
Yeah.
When everything started in the cavern, and then obviously as it moved into America and every other place, what was it for girls, for fans, that they saw? They saw a lot of things, obviously, as Christine says in the book. And tell about your experiences, your personal experiences too. Let me start. I'm going to start with Candy. I'm going to put you on the spot first, Candy.
I was 7.5 years old. I was a child. I think it's very important for people to remember, especially in thinking about Beatles fandom, that the bulk of the first generation Beatle fans were, in fact, children, tweens, elementary school, middle school. Now, that's not to say that there weren't high school, college students. It was across the board, which is partly why they had accrued the power and influence that they did with our generation. But yeah, I was a child. I was immediately smitten. I immediately sensed that I was very precocious. I had a very media-drenched household because of my parents and who they were. And I immediately sensed that, like, this, like, something shifted in the world, basically. Like, I just felt that. And certainly in my world, but then the beauty of it was, like, I quickly realized it wasn't just my world. It was everybody. It was all anybody talked about. It was just everywhere. And living through high Beatlemania, that 64, 65 as a child. So it wasn't sexual for me. It wasn't like, oh, I love Paul, I want to marry Paul. It was not like that. It was some kind of just this fun escape. It became like an environment, almost like a place you go to with your friends. And of course, you connected with other people because of it. The big kids would let you hang out because you liked the Beatles. And it was a very welcoming group. Some of my happiest memories of childhood are dancing at the after school center at PS 200 Queens to rock and roll music, Beatles 65, and seeing if we could like dance really fast and get out of breath for the entire duration of the song. And that's just like a beautiful memories like that. They became a focal point. Like they were the most interesting thing in our lives. They were always happy. They were always there for you. Every picture, because of the brilliant photography, people who were photographing them, their eyes followed you around your bedroom because they were looking at the camera. And so they were just a source of immense joy. And I've come to realize more recently that I think, and as people I interviewed for Beatles talk about this too, but it was definitely true for me that they were a safe place in a world that, for various reasons, did not seem so safe sometimes. Whether it's because of my parents being out to lunch, or teachers being mean, or bullies, or weird dentists. Seriously, like they were a refuge, seriously, in a lot of ways. And of course, as I got older through the years, I was like when I had a chance to get the Remco dolls as an 8-year-old, I wanted Ringo, right? I identified with him because he was maybe seemed a little out of it. He was up there away from the other three. I identified with him in some way. I don't know. But then, of course, as I reached puberty, like it was all about Paul. And I had the White Album picture literally like next to my pillow, like on the wall. Yeah. So it did become something else as I got older and grew up with them. And then, of course, for most of my adult life, it was John. But I think that I'm really a George person, ultimately.
Okay.
But of course, that whole separating out, are you a this or who's your friend, is stupid anyway, because none of them exists without the other. It's, do you like east, west, north, or south better? It's like, you can't do that. But what I did realize, like I had a disproportionate number of George songs on my short lists. So I think I'm a George person. Anyway, that's kind of my story. I'm sticking to it. I have to say, I go through periods where I am very disengaged from the whole thing. And then I go through periods where something intrigues me again and I'm back in. And so I'll shut up now and let somebody else talk.
Christine, I was going to go back to you because, like I said earlier, your book not only goes into the stages of fandom, but it also goes wider than that. And that's one of the really interesting things about the book, because a lot of people have written about Beatle fans, and both male and female. You talk about fandom from both sides, both from the female side and from their side, which is really interesting because they really it's almost like they took the fans under their wings. Would you say? Is that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely an aspect to that. They were like mentors to their fans because the fans definitely saw the Beatles, and female fans too, in this cross-gender sort of situation where they saw the Beatles as the ultimate role models in a sense, in a way that maybe at the time they didn't see women having the same kind of freedom. You can go and look at things that Marianne Faithfull wrote about her career, and you can see that she really struggled with the way that she was presented to the public in the mid-60s. She found a lot more freedom later on, of course, in her career, but not without going through some really difficult things. The Beatles, on the other hand, like Candy was saying, they provided the joy, they provided the fun, but they were also professionals doing something that they loved. They were creative professionals, and that was super appealing, I think, to women of all ages during the mid to late 60s, this idea that there could be different ways that you could live your life. And the Beatles show that in such a positive, spirited way that was very appealing. So in a sense, you're right. There was something happening, like you said, even in the Cavern days. And that's why you could see the Liverbirds saying, sure, we could do that. Even if there's that famous quote coming from the Liverbirds story where John Lennon basically tells them backstage or in the little room, the green room or whatever you want to call it at the cavern, where he says, oh, girls with guitars, that'll never work. But Paul McCartney actually was very encouraging. They also see John's comment as more of a provocation, and they were like, all right, we'll show you what we can do. But like with the regular fans, not the ones who wanted to play music perhaps, but the ones who were just there to support the music, there was a very community-oriented, familial almost feeling, like they were all brothers and sisters in Liverpool in music, and that was something that connected them. So when the Beatles became national stars and would come back to Liverpool, there was still that closeness and familiarity that they had when they would run into fans on the street and so on. And that was something that, with doing more research and writing that chapter about Liverpool, I just loved discovering that sort of fan friend dimension to the story.
And that was one of the things that I found really interesting in the book, how close the Beatles remained to their fans.
Yeah.
The Beatles really cared about their fans. That is something that probably doesn't happen today, not like it did then. And there are so many instances in the book that you're referring to. It's almost amazing to read all of the stories of the different women and the fans talking about how they ran into Paul and John on the street. And they remembered the one story that hit me the hardest, I think, was the one, and you may remember her name better than I do, where Paul gave her the ride home and he started singing "I Remember You." Do you remember that?
She's actually one of the women I interviewed in Liverpool. I was just dazzled as she was telling me this story. I thought, for real? This really happened?
That's just one of the examples that are in the book, the type of stories of the closeness that the Beatles had with their fans. The closeness comes in all sorts of degrees, but it was like there was like I'm trying to think of the word, just a feeling, a general, I'd call it love in the abstract sense of the word, but that's what it was. Kit, I'm going to go to you next. Talk about your personal experience as a Beatle fan.
Well, it's really interesting when, Christine, you mentioned about them being almost mentors. That's what it was like with me. Now, originally, I got into them when I was in 8th grade. And I was fully steeped in 80s pop at the time. I was listening to Duran and Wham and all that, which I still love them. Yeah, Gen X Unite.
Yes.
This one day in chorus class where we could bring in our own music on Fridays, and somebody brought in the 20 Greatest Hits cassette, the pre-one, and 8 Days a Week came on. And that grabbed me. I just thought, wow, that beat's really different. The way it faded in. Yeah, the hand clapping. It was catchy, but it was different. And so I'm like, I think I have to find out, because I knew of the Beatles at this point, because my dad used to play Michelle and Norwegian Wood on guitar. He was a jazz fan and rock and everything, but those really grabbed his attention. He used to play Let It Be in church and that kind of thing. He led the guitar mass at our church. So I certainly knew, but that's my parents' music. And when you're 12 or 13, you don't want to listen to what your parents listen to. Of course, I was hooked. Now, I certainly responded to how good looking they were in their clothes, the whole thing. You bet. I sure did. But I think what ended up really influencing my career and my life was, and Christine and Candy, you were alluding to this, that it was the messages. There were messages that they sent. I don't mean anything weird, but think for yourself. It was about making decisions for yourself, following your own path.
And self-actualization.
Yeah.
Yes.
Exactly. And also the fact that they went against the grain so many times with Revolver. I mean, when Tomorrow Never Knows. The fact that they couldn't read music was probably a really good thing, because they broke these rules and were, I'm sure, told many times, you can't do that. Or when John would say, I want this to sound like 1,000 monks chanting from the mountaintop, and I'm like, what? But I thought, that's really cool that they followed their own path. And also, like in Hard Day's Night, I think this is a thing that anybody can relate to. That wonderful scene when they're riding in the train and this older man comes in and very haughty. It's just classic. And this was many years after it came out that I saw this. But I love that when the man says, I won the war for your sword. Or I fought the war for your sword. And Ringo's, I bet you're sorry you won. And you just thought, I'm sure it was like this in 64, but even in 1985, where I thought, whoa, you're talking to somebody like that? And there were no other adults around. And so I really got all these messages that don't let people tell you what to do. You're an individual, follow that individuality. And of course, spread love, love one another, all these different messages. And so I think it really inspired me. But what if they can do that? Maybe I can do something like that too. Maybe I don't have to conform all the time, and I can follow my passions and make a difference. And so for me, of course, love the look, love the music. And it was, I think, Candy, you were saying about how it's a source of comfort. I think it was for me, too. Probably it was not a big accident that I got into them when I was like 13, 14. Pretty turbulent time in anybody's life.
It's the magic age.
It's the magic age. It really is. And so it was a feeling of comfort to listen to their music, but it was also a way for them to, through their music, through their attitude, through their look, to encourage everybody, not just women, but certainly as a woman, I respond to it saying, wow, you can do what you want. You can form your own opinions. You can break away from your parents in a positive way.
One of the words that people use all the time and is permission.
Yeah.
Something about them, the music, the presentation, their personas, they gave you permission.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Full stop.
Absolutely. And that had a profound effect on my career, my interests. And so I really like that, Christine, when you called them mentors, because that really sparked up like, that's what they were to me in many ways.
Yeah, because may I just add from what you and Candy were just saying, it was a new way to rebel against the mainstream that was not about, say, breaking chairs in a cinema the way the early rock and roll kids did when they saw Jailhouse Rock, or the Beatles weren't about that. The Beatles were about, as you were saying, showing a different way to be that was positive, that was joyful, but was still rebellious in a sassy, cheeky kind of way that was not going to be disruptive and harmful in the way that, say, the first wave of rock and roll was seen by the media.
It was more cerebral. It was more
very
cerebral.
Very much.
Yes.
The things that resonate are, it's thoughtful. It makes you think about it and see how you can work it into your own life, because it's not, certainly when you're this kind of a Beatles person, it's visceral too, but it's not just that. It's a new way of thinking. It's a way of adjusting your mind and knowing that you can make a mark by, you don't have to be obnoxious to do it. You can be funny, and you can be witty, and you could be charming, but you can still make your point known. And specifically, as you point out in your book, Christine, women, the permission, as Candy said, to say, okay, I can change the world, and this is how I'll do it.
And they didn't follow the crowd. That was the other thing. That these were trendsetters. People followed them. So as I said, they were not afraid to go against the grain. And
getting back to the Cavern days, rejection after rejection before they finally broke, they worked really hard before we heard about them. And I think part of why their story, of course, the music, their origin story is so compelling to subsequent generations is because it really is a story about perseverance and persistence and believing in yourself and overcoming the odds. And they knew they were great. So they didn't listen to they knew it was going to happen, and that belief in themselves. And of course, getting back to about Christine's book, showing how they were embraced by their community, by their friends and neighbors, that gave them the confidence. I'm getting verklempt to talk about this. Gave them the confidence to persist and to realize that dream.
When you were talking about your experience, what year are we talking about?
It was 85.
Oh, okay. I wanted to put everybody's comments into perspective.
Susan is the youngest baby boomer in my book.
I am. I'm the youngest person that Candy interviewed. And the Beatles were always there. They were part of the scenery, as it were. They were part of the musical scenery. I don't remember a time when I didn't know it, because my earliest Beatles memory, as I said in Candy's book, is not from 1964. I was just past my second birthday when they were on Ed Sullivan. My mother swore that I was in the room. We moved from our apartment to our house. A week later, she was packing boxes. This is the story she told me for years. And that I was in the playpen and I was in the room. Do I remember this? Not at all. But my earliest Beatles memory is hearing We Can Work It Out on the radio a year later. So I was not quite 4. Okay. And the music was ubiquitous. It was always there in the background. I remember seeing Yellow Submarine as a new movie because my mother was on the PTA and they used to get a movie that they would show the kids in June every year. And so they'd rent out the movie theater, and she was instrumental in getting Yellow Submarine when it was a new movie. So we all got to see it. I remember watching the Saturday morning cartoons. So I tell people often that I am a first generation fan by a technicality because it was there. I don't remember the Ed Sullivan Show, but certainly very close.
Can I just add something about I love your story, and I'm so happy and proud that it's in my book, because it's not, I heard We Can Work It Out on the radio and I loved it. No, that song was played constantly. I can't remember offhand now how many weeks it was number 1. Okay?
WABC, you could set you up.
WABC New York, because I too woke up in the morning, got ready for school, listening to WABC, and that
absolutely,
and it sounded different from. I knew the other stuff too, because I was already on the journey by then, but it sounded different and it was so joyous and so wonderful. So you probably, it's not, I heard it on the radio and I loved it. You probably were like saturated.
It was osmosis. You couldn't escape it. So if your parents were listening to the radio, or if they turned the radio on in the car and you were in the back, you heard it. It was there. You absorbed it. So it was. Now, the big fandom for me came in 1975. Okay. I was just shy of my 14th birthday. I turned 14 in that October, and I went to summer camp, and I was the last year of campers. And there was a girl who was a year older than I, who was a counselor, and she rode the same bus. And she said the fateful words, "Do you like the Beatles?" And I think my answer was something along the lines of, "They're okay." And she took this as, I'm going to saturate this girl with everything that I've gotten. You've got to listen to this album. You've got to read this book. You've got to go see this movie. And remember, you couldn't just pop a DVD or a VHS tape into your TV to watch A Hard Day's Night. You had to wait till somebody showed it. Okay. Yeah. So I didn't see it until probably the fall, when the local public library in Fresh Meadows, Queens, had a movie afternoon, and I dragged this friend of mine who did not like the Beatles, and I dragged her to the Fresh Meadows library to see this movie. And that was the first time I had seen them. The voices got me first. Their voices were the thing, the harmony, the voices. I've been a John girl since day one. His voice was what grabbed me. Didn't hurt that he looked real good, but the voice was what got me first. When I saw the film and they were walking and talking and moving and laughing, and that was like tunnel vision. I didn't see anything else. And I couldn't, the more I could get my hands on, the better. And back then there were 5 books. The Hunter Davies book was your Bible, because that was what there was. My father called Macmillan Publishing, and the book was out of print at that point. He called Macmillan Publishing, and somebody scraped up a copy of that book for me. Wow. And I have an original edition of it because somebody at Macmillan felt sorry for my father. But the other thing, and this is interesting, because Kit was 10 years later than me, and Candy was the right age, slightly younger than your average, but first generation more than me. In the 70s, it was the height of utter uncool to be a Beatles fan.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, the height of uncool. I was ribbed mercilessly. I was bullied over it. I kid you not, bullied, like merciless. Why don't you like this music? And that's garbage music. And why would you listen to that crap and all that stuff? And why don't you like Led Zeppelin? Okay. And right. To be honest with you, the girl who said that to me, I didn't like her. I like Led Zeppelin just fine now, but I pushed them away because the girl who said that to me, I couldn't stand her. It had nothing to do with the band, I learned. But the fact is that I persevered with the height of uncool. Okay. I didn't care. And I did find my people. There were other kids that were fans. We found each other. There's a picture in Christine's book of me and my friend Doreen in my childhood bedroom. And I had so many photographs of the Beatles on my walls that my father used to make a joke that you had to take off your shoes and bow towards Liverpool before you went in the door. She literally said that. And Doreen was a little younger than me, but she had older brothers. I didn't. I was the eldest. And we were Beatles fans together. And she was my first Beatle buddy. And we did all this stuff. And I used to drag my friends into Manhattan to go stand by the Dakota on school holidays. I would make excuses. I would say, let's go to the Museum of Natural History, and which is 10 blocks up. And then I'd lie through my teeth and I'd say, you can't get a downtown train here. You have to walk to 72nd Street. And of course, my friends got on to me after a while. Like, I don't want to go Lennon watching. And I'm like, I do, so too bad. But I never saw him. I missed him by 5 minutes. He had just left. He had just come in. I never saw him. It wasn't for lack of trying.
You know, it's funny.
You did see Yoko, though.
I did see Yoko twice.
Okay.
I saw her actually 3 times. I met her she did a New York Times talk where she was talking about the film about the making of Imagine. Okay. And I met her after that. And then I met her at Cooper Union. She was getting an award for women in the arts from Peter Jennings, the news anchor.
No.
Okay.
And he interviewed her in the Great Hall at Cooper Union, which is a really historic room. Like Abraham Lincoln gave an address in that room. It's a very historic room. And I met her after that. And then the only time I ever saw her on a walking tour, I was giving a tour to a family. The 12-year-old daughter was the fan. And I wrapped the tour up at the Dakota. And we were standing there, and I was standing back from the railing. So the railing and then clear space and then me. And out of the park comes Yoko with an entourage. And she walked between me and the railing. She didn't go around me. She walked between. So of course, Yoko Ono walks between you. You say something, right? So I stuck a smile on my face and I said, hi. And she said, hi. And I said, it's really nice to see you. And she took my hand and she patted my hand and she said, it's really nice to see you too. And then she kept going. And the little girl was freaking out. She couldn't even get her camera out. She was hysterical. And it was just one of those things that I'd already met her twice. So it wasn't quite the hysteria inducing thing that would have been for the child that I was giving the tour to. But I've always felt that we were talking about permission and we were talking about ability to do things. I know, as that mercilessly bullied child, which I was, I learned how to counter that from the Beatles. I know I did. Okay. Because especially John, bless his heart, he had a snappy comeback for everything. Right. And I learned I was already a wise ass. Okay. But I learned how to be a real wise ass. And I was quick on the uptake. So if somebody said something to me, I could counter it. And I wouldn't have been able to do that had I not been a Beatles fan. That literally wrote in my high school yearbook, gee, Susan, you turned out to be really funny and not as bad as all that. Told me, which, boy, that was, anyway. But when I saw them at this reunion, you give tours about the Beatles, you go to the fest, you're on staff at the fest. That's so cool. And I'm thinking, why didn't you say that to me in 1976? But it turned out to be that do you like the Beatles? They're okay. Turned out to be, it changed my life. People describe it, and people describe the Ed Sullivan Show the same way, as the day that stuff went from black and white to Technicolor. And I can tell you, it was like choirs of angels and from the heavens and it saved me. It saved me. It really did.
It was this feeling like everything was going to be okay.
Yeah.
I'm just going to insert a very short personal thing for me.
Sure.
I did see the Ed Sullivan Show. So I'm first generation. My best friend had a few weeks before that asked me about the Beatles, and I had to tell him I didn't know who they were, honest to God. And then my mother took us to a department store, and my sister bought Meet the Beatles, and I bought the singles, including the picture sleeves. And we sat and watched the Ed Sullivan Show. My father didn't like them at that point. He grew to like them later. My mother was okay with them. We all sat and watched them. I wanted to be on that stage as a guy.
Absolutely.
I wanted to be on that stage.
That's very fair, Steve, actually. Somebody else, all of us know Al Sussman.
Oh, yes.
And Al once said to me, because he was 14 when they were on the Ed Sullivan Show, and he said, the next morning in school, all the boys wanted to be them and all the girls wanted to kiss them. And I think that's the best description I've ever heard.
Yeah.
When you talk about, like Christine was talking about, all the men that say that they became musicians because of the Beatles, but then you get girls like the Liverbirds or like the Quattro Sisters who wanted to be musicians because of it. And girls didn't pick up guitars then.
It absolutely did not seem an option for me at all.
Me neither.
And I did have like acoustic guitar lessons when I was, I don't know, 10 or something, but I was not encouraged to do it by my parents. And it was a guy thing. And yeah.
It's interesting because I was thinking about what you were saying just now, Candy, but also some things that Kit and Susan were saying. And for me, the most fascinating thing about putting the book together in terms of the fan component was the generational differences, and not just in how people got into the Beatles, but how they imagined that Beatles space for them. So like you were just saying, Candy, that you couldn't picture yourself picking up a guitar and being on stage and channeling the Beatles in that way for yourself. But see, in my generation, we had, by the time I was 10 years old, the Go-Go's.
Yeah.
The Go-Go's were like all in everything to me. And of course, later I found out that Charlotte Caffey, one of the main songwriters of the Go-Go's, was a huge Beatles fan and saw them at the Hollywood Bowl when she was very young. But so for my generation, I think the second generation of fans, because there were those female role models in music, I could see myself maybe not playing in a band that sounded like the Beatles. And I wouldn't say that when I played in bands at university or post-university, that maybe post-university in Portland when I was doing the Christine Darling stuff, that had a bit more Beatles elements to it. But the Riot Grrrl band, no. The indie rock band before that, no. But it was that idea that could be a possibility for me, even on an amateur level, maybe not a professional level. It was something that I could see myself doing. So it was the converging of being an adolescent in the early to mid 80s and then a teenager, seeing those female role models who had done what they did in part because of the Beatles, or totally because of the Beatles. And then my sort of thinking like, yeah, I could do something. It seemed like more of a possibility. And that's why I'm so wowed by the young women of the mid-60s who said, yeah, we could do this, because they were so ahead of the time.
Chrissy Hynde.
Chrissy Hynde is a really great example. Fuck this, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
But even just the visual, the iconography of a woman holding an electric guitar was like not a thing until Chrissy Hynde, Go-Go's.
It wasn't until after our mothers burned their bras, for real.
No.
It was after that. I know that sounds crazy, right? But you guys, Kit and Christine, are of that generation that you're post Women's Lib. And so it wasn't weird for you. Unseemly completely.
Here's something interesting, though. I'm in the middle of teaching right now a course on the history of 60s girl groups. And one of the things, I taught part 1 in January and starting part 2 in a couple of weeks. But one of the things that was really fascinating that came out of a class discussion we had, where I said, look, I was not around when the girl groups were at their height. Could you tell me a bit? And I was directing this at men and women, but saying, what impact did they have on you? And the women in the class, most baby boomers, said, and I just thought this was fascinating, they said they would get together with their friends and listen to records. But with the girl groups, they didn't just sit and listen to them. They would get up, get hairbrush or whatever to substitute for microphone, would try to do the choreography. So it was like they wanted to be them. They weren't just sitting there and listening, saying, oh, this is fun, great song. And so I think maybe the girl groups were like the first glimpse, in a way, of women saying, hey, maybe I can do that too.
Yeah.
You know,
I think that's interesting because, but those, they didn't play guitars and
Right.
write their songs, but that was still that. You think about a group like the Supremes, for example, who they were sent to charm classes and they were
holding I'm left-handed. So about holding an instrument that requires electricity. It's a machine. You plug it in. It was not something girls did. It just wasn't. And I have very vivid memories of watching the Supremes on the Ed Sullivan Show in those days. Those
in those gowns,
the glamour of it, the arms, all of it.
But you can see why that would be very empowering.
Yeah,
because they were still up there. They weren't just like us, the singers of the 40s and 50s. And no disrespect at all to people like Ella Fitzgerald and Connie Francis, not at all. But it was different. It was more empowering, even though there was that presentation about them, the way Motown would cultivate a female artist. But even that was more empowering than being backed by a big band and singing.
Yeah.
You know, it's something about it.
Let's go in a different direction, because women in the lives of the Beatles come in many different or several different ways. And I'm talking about the girlfriends and the wives. How would the various women in the Beatles' lives reflect their individuality?
The individuality of their partners,
of each Beatle. Yoko and Cynthia with John, Linda and Jane and Nancy with Paul.
As a child with Heather.
That was,
it happened.
I know. And there's living proof of that. But
yes.
And all the different relationships they've had, especially the women that have been in Paul's life and in John's life, it really is an interesting reflection on them individually. Olivia versus Patty. It's interesting. It's the way they went from one woman to another, how each woman affected them. Am I sounding too weird here?
No, I think you're onto something. When you think about, especially since all of them had second or even third relationships. So even it almost reflected the kind of women they went for later was reflective of where they were when they got to a point where they had evolved in their thinking and they needed women who could express that as well. And Paul, for example, didn't like that Jane had a career, but he wanted Linda in the band. So there's a whole, it expresses something about the way that he started thinking about things. Cynthia, I mean, it happened the way it happened, but John was one of these people that his mind moved so fast that he couldn't, I don't think that he could have sustained that if he wanted to. No. He needed to find something that reflected where he was at that point.
And once he found Yoko, that was it.
Exactly. And that's no disrespect meant to Cynthia either. It's just that it was he was a different guy.
He wouldn't have evolved in the same way. I think that one of the greatest losses, there's so many great losses about the loss of Lennon, but I think that in this stage where we really need good real male role models of men who genuinely evolve and own their shit and evolve and recognize the stupidity of holding down half of humanity. He
better believe it.
He could really have, I think he really could have been a great voice for a great male voice for feminism.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But he had to get there. He had to get there.
Right.
And he was getting there. I mean, he was. By even the early to mid 70s, I would say he was
Oh,
pretty
yeah.
on board with a lot of the ideas of second wave feminism. And I think it's really an interesting question, Steve, because I was coming at it in my chapter that focuses on the wives and girlfriends from the standpoint of the women and how they reflected the gender norms of the times. And that is obviously wrapped up in the relationships and the gender norms, of course, for the Beatles as young men during the 60s. And here we see the culture changing, and the Beatles are absolutely part of that change and spearheading a lot of the cultural changes through young people, through their music, through their presence in youth culture and popular culture and so on. But so that relationship between the individual and the societal is so super fascinating from the sociological point of view and the historical point of view. I guess I wasn't thinking so much about the psychology of the Beatles around these things. The fact that there was a change going on, especially for women at that time, but I would say also for young men, getting their heads around these changes for women. And if you were married to a woman at that time, how were those changing social codes affecting marriages and relationships? So we see how that works out with John and Cynthia's marriage, and then his marriage to and partnership with Yoko. We see that, as you said, Susan, with Paul and Jane. The fact that Paul was with Jane for such a long time, he was clearly fascinated by her intellect, by her talent as an actor, by the way she grew up, her family with all that cultural capital, but the fact that she came from such a rich culturally driven and motivated family. He loved all of that about her, but at the same time, it ultimately didn't work out. And we can speculate then, well, maybe he did in the end want kind of more of a traditional sort of situation where, but not totally, because Linda was on the road and in his band.
And she also had a career as a photographer before.
Exactly.
She was a woman. It was great that they found each other and married and had a family and everything, but I think that she would have been fine on her own if she would have been, she had a life. She decided to hitch that life to his, which is great, but she didn't have to.
I think Linda was the perfect combination of bohemian and eccentric and intellectual in this artsy way, coupled with very much being a mom and into that and raising a family. I think that was the perfect combination. And like you said, that her career was one that enabled her to be with Paul and the kids full time, basically.
And
so that worked out really well for them.
And he goes through that all through Man on the Run and the Wings book, and especially Man on the Run. I was surprised how much they were talking about him and Linda in there, and he had to do that because she was an integral part of that whole situation.
I just wanted to mention one thing about Yoko. Christine, you talked about gender norms. I think that was one of the reasons why people were just aghast when John ended up getting together with Yoko, and she got so much hatred from members of the press and yes, even some fans, because to see she disrupted the gender norms of the time is putting it mildly. She obviously did, but she had a profound impact on him, and not just in terms of his views of women, that's huge, but his art. I wonder if he'd never met her, and I don't know if he and Cynthia would have stayed together. In any case, I'm not sure, but would he have evolved the same way? I think
She can push the envelope.
Yeah.
Were you at the Beatle Fest in Los Angeles when Cynthia was there?
No,
I've never met her.
Wish I had.
That was my first Beatle Fest, and I went specifically to see her. And I remember being in the auditorium, and she was talking about Yoko, and the boos from the crowd.
It was awful.
I was almost ashamed how loud the booing was. And it's still, and there are some corners
still happen today. I'd like
not
to
as
think
bad.
It happens less. It does happen.
Yes, it does.
Online, there's vitriol that you don't want to know. And
I know it. Believe me.
I
You
know it.
bet
And
you do.
Do you think this is racism?
Some of it.
It's racism, it's misogyny, and it's just there's others. She didn't fit any mold
Right.
at all. Okay, she did what the hell she wanted to do. She didn't care,
Mhm.
and she did it with John Lennon. Great, and if she did it without him, great. She was prepared to do whatever, and she didn't care.
I think the difference, you have to compare Linda and Yoko. Both came in, took a Beatle away from the fans.
From each other.
From each other.
The reaction that both of them got was quite different. Linda got hate. Her voice didn't help there, but when her singing voice, especially in the beginning, although I have to say that Wings compilation sounds so good, it's amazing. But
when you isolate a harmony track, it doesn't sound good, and that's the problem. But anyway, go ahead, Steve.
But it sounds a lot better than it did. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
But Yoko really got it hard, and I've encountered people today that still think that she broke up the Beatles and all this. And you try to tell them, no, she didn't.
Anybody saying that at this point knows nothing about the Beatles, and
It
it's
gives
just
me a
like
headache.
it's just ignorance and hate more in the day.
There's always some idiot at the fest that shows up in a t-shirt saying, I still blame Yoko.
Yeah, or still pissed at Yoko.
Yeah.
We can blame that one. No disrespect to the dead, but we can blame that one squarely on Tony Bramwell.
Yes.
Could I say, and maybe some of this story, but if not, it's a good one, and it shows, again, a generational shift. I'm not saying that there aren't, say, Gen X, second generation Beatles fans who don't say negative things about Yoko, because certainly there would be. But I think for Gen Xers, the shift was to Courtney Love. Like, she became the Yoko Ono of the Gen X generation. But at a Beatle Fest in Los Angeles in the early 90s, there was a group that signed up for the Battle of the Bands portion of the fest. I don't know what name they went under, but they recorded some albums under the name Tater Tots. And one of the albums is a parody of the Help cover, but with Yoko Ono doing all the poses.
Cool.
And they got on the Beatle Fest stage and did this very avant-garde tribute to Yoko Ono, covering a couple of her songs. And people at the fest freaked out. And I think eventually they were pulled off the stage. But these were all younger generation Beatle fans who thought, we're going to do something really different, and we're going to pay tribute to Yoko. And wow, that didn't go over well. But I love this story because some of the members of that group, or one member of the group, is in one of my favorite bands from my generation, Red Cross, who are huge Beatles fans. They are huge Beatles fans, and you can hear it in some of their music. And I love that they've paid tribute to Yoko in their own way, in that sort of new generational voices kind of way. But I just had to share that with you.
No, never heard that.
It's sad. But there's still this, but the other thing too, though, is the reason that younger Gen X groups wanted to, and later wanted to do that, was because she started having dance hits and started having people started appreciating what she was doing, and it was about time. The story, the apocryphal story, is that John heard the B-52s and said they're ready for you now.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think this harkens back to, no disrespect to first gen fans at all, but there's that idea that they don't want certain things to change at all. And there's a resistance. There's a resistance to when Taylor Swift broke some kind of sales record and they flipped out and they bitch and moan. And I literally have said to friends of mine, people I love, and I've said to them, when you say that in front of your daughters and your granddaughters, you sound like your father did when you were watching the Beatles on Ed Sullivan.
I have to say, like, a lot of boomer male Beatle fans have this weird sense of ownership around them.
Yes.
That is just misplaced.
Not you, Steve.
Steve's ducking his head.
Not you.
No, we're not talking about
present
you.
company excluded.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm not including you in this, but I think we've all encountered these people, whether it's Beatles scholar world or at the local pub. We all have run into these boomer men who It's like I can't tell you how many match dates I have when I was doing that kind of thing, where I would mention that I've written this book, and it's like they proceed to explain the Beatles to me.
Yes.
I've had the Beatles mansplained more
I
times than I
can
can.
just imagine.
Yeah.
And so,
And,
and I think the distaste for Yoko is part of that, because
Right.
she took John away from them.
we've described it, and Kit and I have had this conversation for years, and I think I probably had this conversation with Candy and Christine too.
Yes,
That
we've all
there's
had
a
it.
sense of old boyness,
Yeah.
which it never was that way. It's like there's a lot of fandoms that have been mentrified, as it were, when the women were the first fans. Star Trek is one of those. And when you think about, as soon as it doesn't become serious until men are interested in it and push the women out of the picture. And I am not, it's not Steve, it's not the other men that we know who've written books with us or asked us to contribute to their books or who champion us. I have no quibble with those, with the men that I'm really good friends with who are Beatles scholars, because, and yet it's often the guy who figures how much trivia proves what kind of fan you are.
Yeah.
And it's not about the trivia, as we all, 5 of us who are having this conversation, know that's not it.
Right.
And yet that's their measure. And so there's that problem of, if you don't know what time Paul McCartney broke wind while he was recording yesterday, then you're not a fan. And it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Let me ask you this. I just wanted very quickly to say, if you were taking a course on the Beatles, what would you prefer to hear from your professor? Exact facts in terms of dates, like the whole class, like pinpointing dates and when this thing happened, that thing happened? Or do you want to hear a comprehensive narrative that engages you and that is interesting and that makes you want to learn more? That to me is the difference.
Yep.
That's what a good course should do. A good course should place them in history. And because after all, we're talking 60 plus years now. So that's definitely the realm of history. It's more than 50 years ago.
And I'm just comparing that to the fandom thing, the one-upping people about trivia and details.
The book that Kit did with Ken, Fandom and the Beatles,
I'm in there.
doesn't go there. Talks about the narrative and setting it in its time and its place.
Well, I think
it's not the trivia.
A lot of first-gen fans, and I would say this probably skews more male than female, they're not interested in the big ideas that surround the Beatles. They're more in, and I'm not judging that. In other words, it's the music, it's the memories, it's the nostalgia. They're not open to nuanced or cultural interpretation or contextualizing. I think they're taking it more at a face value, and it makes me feel good, which is fine. I'm not judging that. But I think those of us who are, it's the reason we do what we do, because we engage with ideas. We're writers, we're scholars. Right? So we see the huge, deep, rich text that they are to contextualize in so many ways. But some people just don't want to bother with it. I got some of the reviews on Amazon about my book. It's like, why does she talk about all this? Who cares? Like, this isn't like, their impact is, I think, of huge historical importance. And
Absolutely.
And some people are just not interested in that.
I wanted to say this part till the end, but I'm going to say it now, is that I think your point about Generation Xers is well stated, and I'm hoping that any Generation Xers that are watching this realize that it's not just the times and dates, because the Beatles had such an effect on history.
Yes.
Not only on sociology, on history itself, on music, on the music business. And one of the questions
advertising, fashion, politics, spirituality,
it goes on and on.
Everything. And even, and another part I was going to ask you, Christine, about was the fact that you mentioned both sexes, sexuality. They had a big effect on sexuality too. There's all that. They had the effect that they had on the world really can't be put up in one book or there are so many books out there, but
a lot of younger people don't see it because they live in the world the Beatles made, right? For those of us that either watched the transition, as I feel blessed to have done, or have studied it, we see how their influence is so pervasive.
See, what I love about both Christine's book and Candy's book is that you guys place them in that historical context and their influence on the world, because it's so pervasive. And like you say, we live now in the world the Beatles made. Okay. As somebody who's always been interested in history, as all of us here are, to place them in that historical context is important.
Yeah.
Because I think, and this is often lost on younger people, which it shouldn't be, is that they don't necessarily understand, unless they want to go out of their way to study it or they become interested in it, what the world was like before.
Yeah.
And I think that, Christine, when you talk about the influence of the Beatles on women and women on the Beatles, and when you, Candy, talk about the influence of the Beatles in remaking the world, or when you write something about fandom in the Beatles and you talk about the way fans approach them from a historical standpoint, or when we do panels at symposia, I really think that academic symposia are where the fandom, the big fandom is going, not the casual fandom. And I think that's great. But I think that placing it in historical context is important.
Yeah.
Because you can't understand the world you live in if you don't understand the world that came before it.
Yep.
I think that all three of the books that you guys have done place in that very specific historical context that is necessary in order to understand the phenomenon.
And that's basically the point of this whole discussion, is that there is so much to be learned about them that is a lot more than the music. And that's one of the great things. Look at, let's take, for example, the Rolling Stones. As good as the Rolling Stones have been, I think as a whole, the Beatles catalog is much more influential on music than the Rolling Stones is.
Oh, the Stones are a great band, but they're the band that's been more or less doing the same thing for 60 years. Yeah. And I'd like to point out too that Mick Jagger is in the Epstein files.
Whoa.
Thank you,
In a photo with Clinton, Gates, and a couple of other dudes around a table. And not surprised, but disturbed nonetheless.
Yeah,
of course.
But yeah, there are a number of bands, wonderful bands, that came out of the 60s, obviously. Stones, the Kinks, so many others. Great, yeah, right, exactly. Great bands, great bands. But are there conferences about them? Are there classes that are being taught just on them? I just think it
was epical.
And the Beatles had such an impact in all the ways we've been discussing during this conversation that are still around today. It's just amazing when I've talked to younger people about it. It's like sampling. Oh, the Beatles did that years ago. The list goes on. Bring the avant-garde in. Oh, yeah, the Beatles did that. The list goes on. And so I think, as I said, as great as those bands are, Kinks, Stones, all that, they haven't quite had the impact, the tremendous impact and longevity that the Beatles have had.
What's very interesting too is that in order to teach kids about the Beatles, I'm saying this as a mom, okay? My kid's almost 28 at this point, but he was raised on Beatles music, okay? And unlike the other bands where you may have to teach them to like it, if you play Beatles music for a child, they just like it.
Yes.
Of course.
And it starts something.
Yeah.
And I never had to force my son to listen to them. He would ask for them. I gave him the one CD as a present because he had a CD player in his room when he was little. And it was his because I didn't need the music. I had it. So I gave it to him. And if CDs could wear out, he wore it out. But here's the thing, okay? If that starts a lifelong interest in history or a lifelong interest in music or a lifelong interest in context of the phenomenon, then you've sparked something in your child.
Yeah.
And look, I think I did that. And not even trying hard to do it. I just played the music. It was always there.
Yeah.
I do have one thing to say to Christine. Christine, you were talking about all the different female recording stars that got their fame in the 60s, you left out two people. And I was surprised. One, I'm very surprised at. The other one, I'm not. The one that surprised me was Dusty Springfield.
Do I not mention Dusty Springfield in there?
I looked.
No.
I did a search last night. And
Dusty. I love Dusty.
Oh,
So
you love?
I love Dusty Springfield, but yeah, the book can't be all and everything.
No, I know.
Invite someone else to do a part 2 if they would like to.
And don't take that as a criticism. The other person I was thinking of was Judith Durham of The Seekers.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No criticism on your. Let me just say, the book is an incredible work. What you've done. I mean,
Thank you.
That you've done with that book is just amazing. Let's let people know, first of all, how they can get it. I know it's on Amazon. It's it's in Kindle form. I recall, though, there is no audiobook of this, right? Is that right?
But I can let you in on something, and that is that a revised version of the book is coming out in a couple of years, and I'm hoping an audiobook will be coming out with it. So it'll have some updates, and maybe Dusty Springfield will get a mention.
The nature of the revisions to make it like
it's going to be paperback only, and it's going to be just slightly revised for even more of a general readership
That's what I
audience.
thought. Very good. I'm happy to hear that. That's great.
Yeah, I'm really excited about that. And yeah, I would love to do an audiobook of it. But I was going to say, at the moment, probably the usual outlets, you can find the paperback and the ebook version. And I don't want people to freak out if they Google it and they see the hardback price pop up, because there is definitely a very affordable paperback version and Kindle or ebook version that you can get as well. Yeah, and it's pretty easily found at this point. Bloomsbury.
If you search on Amazon, for example, it's very, very easy to find. But yeah, it's just, I mean, works. The idea of doing a book of this nature and doing it the way you did it was just incredible. It was really wonderful.
Thank you.
You've done quite
Thank you so much. And I just want to again thank Candy for her landmark book, Beatleness. That was such an inspiration to me too. And of course, her work is cited in my book, as is Kit's work. And thank you, Kit, again for the interview, and Susan as well. And it's just been, for me, and I know you've heard me say this before, but such a huge, wonderful thing about writing this book was connecting with you, connecting with fellow women Beatles fans and writers and musicians and artists, just reconnecting with that community that I had glimpsed through Beatlefest as a child, but then hadn't been to Beatlefest or the Fest for Beatles fans again until 2024. That's a pretty huge gap from 1980 to 2024. Wow. Having that sense of the Beatles culture as it is now, connecting also and getting to know younger people, younger women who have gotten into the Beatles. It's such a fantastic community, and there's so much great work that's being done in all different areas of keeping the Beatles legacy going for new generations. So that's, to me, that's been such a wonderful aspect of contributing this book to Beatles literature, Beatles culture. That's been probably my favorite aspect of doing the whole thing.
Have you considered doing a version for younger readers?
With the revised version, I think there'll be something in there. But do you mean for like children or for adolescent readers?
Maybe adolescents. I don't think children would be able to grasp some of the
finer points.
Yeah, but high school readers maybe. Have you considered that, or have you written anything along that line, maybe for publishing?
I haven't really considered that. That's a good idea. I don't know that I'm the right person to write that kind of book for that particular audience. I would say that my writing is quite accessible as far as academic writing goes. I really try to bring it to a broad audience so that everyone can grasp it and understand it. So I think there would be some older teenagers who would read the book and totally get it, or even 15-year-olds who would read it and understand.
Okay.
And again, maybe there will be other books that are aimed at that audience about the Beatles. But again, I'm not sure if I'm the perfect writer for something like that.
Have you got any upcoming events about the book that you're going to be doing that online, maybe things online that people can tune into? Or
I don't have anything lined up internationally in terms of online at the moment. I think maybe as it gets closer to the revised edition
Right.
coming out, I would
Yeah.
probably do something. And I'm also just at the beginning of starting a new book project with my sister. So that's quite exciting.
it's not a Beatle book, I take it.
Oh, yes.
There you go.
But I can't.
Can you tell us any more about it?
can't-
Morgan?
Yeah, you give us a little bit of a
No.
hint.
I really can't.
Tantalizing
I
hints.
have to stay stum about it at the moment
No.
as a promise to my sister. But hopefully soon we'll be
Hopefully
able to
Beautiful.
say something about it.
When
Yeah.
you have the news, talk to me and let me know. We'll break it.
I can't wait to hear what this is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm
I'm excited.
intrigued.
I would love to be able
Thank
to
you.
break the news on
Well,
that.
Mariana is one of the people my book is dedicated to because she really, unlike maybe some other people in my generation, I'm sure you've heard the stories of people getting into the Beatles through their parents. And that was not the case for me. It was definitely because of my sister, who's 5 years older, and she got us on the Beatles train pretty early on in the like mid to late 70s. Yeah.
Very cool.
There's often an older sibling involved. Even
Yeah.
back
Yes.
in the day, there was often an older sibling involved who kind of drew you in,
Yeah.
or you
Nudged it
jumped
along.
together.
Let me
True.
let me ask everybody. First, I'll start with Candy, then Kit, then Susan. What are you guys doing now? Is there anything
I'm
going
talking
on with
to-
you that we should know about? Candy?
I don't know. I think about writing another book. I don't know if
You've
I
been talking about that for so long.
I know. I know.
Come on.
Let me just talk about Beatles for a second. It's available in the usual places where books are available, including your library if you don't want to buy it. If you are going to buy it, get the paperback version because it is better. I have a bunch of articles up on my website, candyleonard.com, essays, some about the Beatles, some what I call Beatles adjacent, different cultural issues. Yeah, I don't know what the next project's going to be. It's going to be something. I've been saying this for a while, I know, but I keep getting re-traumatized by the political climate, and it makes it difficult to think about certain types of things.
The last time I talked to you, you broke the news that the book was available in Thai. Remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Any other languages since then?
No, it's weird. I'm happy that a publisher in Thailand wanted to do it. I
That's
had
cool.
to midwife the whole thing because my publisher is so like not up to the task. But anyway, yes, there's a Thai version.
Cool.
I would love there to be a Spanish version, which I've put some effort into trying to make happen, and I might look into that a little further. I think there could be a Spanish version of my book. I think there'd be a market, but what do I know? Maybe German, maybe Japanese. I don't know, but it ain't happening. So we'll see. I don't know. I'm not sure what the future holds for me as a writer, frankly, but there's something.
Kit, what's going on with you?
Been very busy with my podcasts, Talk More Talk, and things we said today. We're putting a new episode up featuring Erica White, who is coming out with a book on the Butcher cover.
Oh,
This
wow.
fall.
Oh,
We had a great conversation about
On the
Excellent.
butcher cover.
Yeah.
Yes, and a bit beyond that, before and after. It's placing it in history, culture. It's a fascinating, sounds like a fascinating book. So that's up. Toppermost, the Poppermost, where we go through the history of the Beatles on the charts, not just the Beatles themselves, but we look at some of the other artists and songs from that period that either have a direct connection to the Beatles or influence them in some way. So we try to paint a broader picture, once again, of what the music scene was like when the Beatles were releasing their different singles. And also Toppermost, the
That sounds
Poppermost.net.
really cool.
Ken Womack and I do a series called Classic for a Reason, where we lead a discussion about why certain albums are considered classics. We did Steely Dan's Asia last time and had a blast. That was so
Which
much
I
fun.
couldn't.
Next one that's coming up is Radiohead's OK Computer. That's going to be fun. That'll be in a couple weeks. And as I mentioned, I'm teaching a course on the 60s girl groups. Part 1 was in January, where I went back even to vaudeville days and showed how some sister groups emerged from that, and then the 50s, the Andrews Sisters and all that were the precursors. So the second part, now we're fully in the girl group era. We'll talk about Motown. We'll talk about the Brill Building. We're going to talk about all different things like that. You can follow me on Facebook, kiddotool.com. I've got all this information, where to register, all that stuff. So keeps me out of trouble.
I'm still doing my tours. I do them by appointment. It's fabpronyctours.weebly.net or weebly.com, I'm sorry. And you can always get in touch with me through that, and I will do a tour by appointment. So if anybody that's going to be in New York City, let me know. And if I'm available, I'm yours. No plans at the moment to update the Beatles Fab Four Cities book, although Richard and David and I have talked about it, but we're also busy with crazy things. But there are no fests this year, so obviously the fest is not happening. But I've become involved in this Beatles Festival in Kinsale, Ireland, which is in the south of Ireland, about 2 hours from Dublin. Really had a great time last year at the inaugural one and this year at the second one. And I've been asked to help plan it for next year. Not like a fest in the States at all. Definitely very different. The whole town gets involved, and there are fascinating discussions. But it's not like there's no dealer room or anything like that. But it's a lot of fun. It's a great weekend in a beautiful town.
When is it?
It's the last weekend of January, which
Oh,
is a really weird time to go to Ireland, but it's because it's a specific bank holiday. It's the St. Bridget's Day bank holiday. The reason that I got involved in this is that Patrick Ryan, no relation, who was planning this, wanted to amplify women's voices. And the reason he wanted to do that was because the St. Bridget's Day holiday is a fairly new Irish bank holiday, and it is the first one that specifically honors a woman. And so he felt that he wanted to amplify women's voices in the fandom. And I'll give her a shout out. I owe my friend Jackie Holmes in Liverpool dinner the next time I'm there, because she's the one that put me in touch with Patrick, and it's the best thing that ever happened. So I owe Jackie dinner. So Jackie, if you're listening to this, I owe you dinner. And doing some various things. I was a presenter at Ken Womack's Everything Fab 4 Fest last November. He's planning to do another one this November. I'm about to submit an abstract to him, so we'll see if I'm a presenter, but I'm going to help him plan that as well. And just I've got my hands in a whole bunch of Beatles things, writing articles, been on various podcasts, this one, others. Always willing to be a guest on anybody's podcast if they want to talk about interesting stuff. And would love to join you again, Steve, if there ever comes a time.
Absolutely.
But that's what I'm doing, a million and one things. And now that I'm technically retired from everything else, I have the time to devote to it. So it's good.
I already tagged you once that time I called you at Beatlefest.
That's right.
We did a live thing from Beatlefest.
That was last year in New York, about a year ago. Steve contacted me. Do you want to give me a live report? And so I had to go find a quiet corner so I could give him a live report. But it was fun. I had a really good time doing that. So I'll do it again if you ever need it.
And Candy has been part of this podcast since the beginning.
Oh, yeah?
Yes, she has. We spent many shows talking about all sorts of fun things. The one I remember the best, Candy, was when we did the White Album box set. And I was able to get you in advance of that. Do you remember that? You got to hear the box set before it was released.
Oh, yes, I do remember that.
Yeah, I was the one that went to Los Angeles and met Giles Martin, but we talked about that, talked about everything else when I came back.
Yeah.
Anyway,
every time I think I have nothing more to say about the Beatles, I realize that I do.
Yes, you do.
All of us realize that.
Yep.
I would like to just say, I am so proud that I am part of your book, Candy, and your book, Christine. I can't tell you how proud I am of that. I tell people about it all the time and say, you need to buy these books, and not just because I'm in it, but because they're wonderful books.
Yep.
And appearing on panels with Kit, it fills me with happiness. And I just really am proud. I'm proud of this fandom. I'm proud of this community.
Yep.
Here, we stuck it together through the pandemic, man. We did stuff online, and the community got tighter. And I cannot tell you how proud I am of the Beatles community, for real.
I'm really proud too, and I just want to quickly give a shout out to another woman who's doing fabulous work in this area, and that's Holly Tesler at the University of Liverpool, who organized the master's program there on the Beatles. That's up and running and doing a fabulous job with that. And she's also one of the editors with Paul Long, who's here at Monash University in Australia, of the Journal of Beatles Studies. And I'm
Yes.
very proud to say I was one of the founding editorial board members for that. So I just wanted to definitely mention Holly because it's a wonderful
Hear, hear.
community of fans in general, women working in the space of fandom and authorship, scholarship, and so on. It's just, it is a fabulous community. So I just wanted to second that, Susan, and mention Holly because she's doing really great work.
Holly's amazing.
Liverpool
Yeah.
right
I saw her in Kinsale last year. She was one of the speakers, and I hadn't seen her since pre-pandemic. And yeah, she's pretty amazing. So well-deserved shout out for sure.
Ladies, I can't thank you enough. This has been a blast.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
It
Steve.
feels so
Thanks,
good
Steve.
seeing all of you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It feels very
So happy to
familiar. I
see
feel like
you.
I've just seen you. It's like something so familiar, but it's very nice.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's always
Really
good to
nice.
speak
We'll have to
to.
do these again.
Let's,
Definitely.
yep, absolutely. I'm there.
Okay, ladies, again,
Thank you.
Thank
people out there,
you.
just
Thank
hang in
you.
there because I probably will have something else to say.
Oh,
Here's our interview with Dan Geller and Dayna Goldfine, the co-producers of Peter Asher Everywhere Man. And we go into the making of the film, and there's a few things that you'll learn about the film in here that are quite interesting. So let's get on with it. I saw the movie yesterday, and I was completely in love with it. I've seen Peter several times perform, and it was just fantastic. You guys did a wonderful job. Wonderful job. But why don't we start from the beginning? When did you hit Peter with the idea? For how long has this been? When did it start?
Well, I would say we hit Peter with it in December of 2019, but it started 12 years before that when Dayna did something.
Well, oh yeah. So in 2012, I got a call from my high school boyfriend who had moved to San Francisco and was living with Linda Ronstadt.
Just as a housemate.
As a housemate. Yeah. And he still lives there. And he said, Linda has an extra ticket tonight to go see this new a new cabaret show that her ex-manager, Peter Asher, is doing. Do you want the ticket? And I had no idea who Peter was, but I definitely wanted to meet Linda Ronstadt. So I said to my boyfriend, my ex-boyfriend, I said, I am so there. And then going purely with the intention of meeting Linda, once the show started unfolding, within about 10 minutes, I just kept wishing that Dan, my partner and husband, was there with me because it was so clearly a documentary that was waiting to be made.
But someone else had started to make it and was filming that night. And she ultimately did not go on to produce the documentary. I think she shot it a little bit here and there, and then it kind of fell apart. In the meantime, Dayna and I got to know Linda, and would always ask when we were over at her place whether she knew anything about that documentary. And eventually, at some point, she said from what Peter had told her, it had been dropped. And that was roughly around the time when Peter was coming to perform his memoir show at Bimbo's 365 Club, December 2019. And Dayna and I went. Linda kind of paved the way a little bit, letting Peter know that these two filmmakers might be interested in doing something. And as soon as the show started up, I knew as well that Peter's a great storyteller. His story's amazing, that it could be, the show itself could be part of a spine of the documentary. And we asked Peter right afterward, he said yes. And then we didn't start until 2023 because COVID came in between.
He said, let's start talking about how this might happen. And then we started writing back and forth. But then, of course, in March of 2019, COVID
Or
really...
2020.
No, 2020. Sorry, yes.
2020.
March of 2020, COVID started. Yeah, so once things loosened up a little bit, Dan and I would go down to Malibu and hang out with Peter and talk about, well, like, what would we do if we were to do this? And that kind of went on for like almost 2 years. And finally, Peter said, are you going to keep coming to Malibu to have lunch with me, or are you going to actually do something? And so right about that time, we were also having brunch with Linda, and Linda said, "You guys, I'll be your first interview." And so then it was like, and once we did, we said, if that's the case, we're here next week with a camera. So that was January of 2023. And once that happened, it just kicked everything into place.
Now, I've seen Peter's show several times. And when it started out, I was going, well, they're going to base it on the show, but you didn't do that. You felt there's so much information in there. The archival clips are just incredible because of the stuff you have. How did you decide to go? Because you really fleshed out his life so much. There is so much there that isn't in the show. And people who have seen the show are going to get so much more. They're going to learn so much more information about him. Plus, you have the Gordon Waller interview at the end, which is really incredible. Plus, you have appearances by James Taylor. Paul McCartney's voice is in there. And those quotes especially got me, because when he's talking about Jane Asher, I've never heard him say that personal stuff about Jane Asher. And so that's really interesting. You talked to Linda, you talked to James Taylor, you talked to Chris O'Dell, and that actually was connected to what she was doing, because she was also doing a documentary at the time.
That night when Dan came to see the show for the first time, and I was kind of in the second round of seeing it, when Dan looked at me and said, you're absolutely correct, this is a documentary in the making, both of us said, wouldn't it be fun to try to use it as the backbone of the story, but then really flesh it out by going and talking to the people that Peter talks about. And because we knew from the beginning that, he'd been in the limelight from the moment he was a child star, right, with Claudette Colbert, we knew there was going to be archival material. We didn't know how rich it was going to actually be. If you saw our documentary about Leonard Cohen, that's also an archivally based film. And I think one of the most fun things about these sorts of films is doing that archival search.
In fact, we were down in LA around some awards campaign things for the Hallelujah Leonard Cohen movie and met up with David Jacks. And this was before we began filming with Peter, but we knew we were going to do the movie. And David had written a book that he spent 20 years researching called Peter Asher, A Life in Music. And so not only did we hit it off with David enough to say, hey, let's bring you on if you're willing to help us out and actually get rights to his book, because he had done so much incredible research. And in some ways he filled in a lot of the gaps that we would not have known about otherwise. But it really was fertile ground for us. And he had some incredible audio interviews with Betsy Asher, who had since passed away and whose presence is important to the movie. In the same way that we were amazed that Keith Putney had recorded the video interview with Gordon Waller backstage late in Gordon's life. But both of those interviews, I feel, are so important to the movie in building out Peter's life. But I think...
I just want to stop and emphasize what Dan just said. We have that Gordon Waller interview only because Keith Putney, who is now Peter's manager, was prescient enough to sit Gordon down for that interview, which is so rare, because I think at the time Keith was actually managing Gordon as well. And he had this relationship with Gordon that allowed Gordon to talk about things in a real way. I think we'll always be grateful for having that material. It was really important to us to bring Gordon to life.
And the McCartney interview you mentioned, by the way, is from audio tapes that Barry Miles had made with Paul for the Many Years From Now book in the mid-90s when he was recording them. At that point, Miles and Paul had known each other for decades. So there's an intimacy there, and that is so amazing. Paul had to give us permission to use it, which he did. But it is, you're right, not only about the way he talks so sensitively and personally about Jane, but also about Peter and about Peter's mom and about Peter's dad. It's an incredible portrait of that household from someone who was both inside and outside that house, living there for over 3 years, but also had come from the outside. And that material is so beautiful to me too.
How, I guess hesitant is the word I'm thinking of off the top of my head, but was Peter hesitant about getting this personal about his life? Because it really does get pretty personal with him.
Yeah, it was hard.
In the movie.
I think maybe had he known, although, honestly, had he watched, and I know he had, watched our past work, he knows that Dan and I don't do surface things, and we do dive deep. And whether he consciously knew it or not, he was in for, a real treatment of his biography. So, and that involves the downs as well as the ups. And, so we started shooting in January of 2023. And then the last thing we shot before really wrapping the editing was in March of 2025. And so across that period of time, we would sit him down at that desk that you see him at. And, that we would say, okay, Peter, it's flower shirt time. And he would know that we were going to come and have a more intimate conversation with him. And I think he would probably steel himself a little bit because he is a very, debonair British guy from a certain,
Yes.
and I mean, as Eric Idle says in the film, like, to be fair, we're British and we're from this era and we don't really talk about our feelings very much.
He's also somewhat reserved, I think, too. At times talk to him. He's a gentleman. He's a pure British gentleman. He really is.
And what Linda says in the movie, and she's said it since to us just when we've been together, is that Peter is socially awkward. He's shy. And then Linda is quick to add, but so is Linda. And so she understands that and respects that. So one of the things for us, it was to be comfortable with his silences. He sat for interview after interview and took them all over England, as you see in the movie. He's very much present and willing to talk about things if you push a bit. But there are times where we're hanging out together. He's extremely bright. And so he's inside his head thinking about all sorts of things. And if one is comfortable with the silences, then it allows him to feel comfortable opening up when it's appropriate and a moment is there for us to ask those questions.
Were there particular incidents or particular parts of his life that he had to be coaxed into talking about? Or was he free?
I mean, obviously the personal stuff, it definitely took a bit to get him to talk about his father and his father's suicide. He's not really done that before.
Right.
And to tell the truth, we didn't even know about it until one of our archivists in England, because we'd hired a couple incredible archivists to start going through things and people that specialized in music. In fact, Barry Miles turned us on to them. One of them said, "Oh, I'm going to send you a newspaper article from, I don't know, whenever year, the late 60s. It's really sad." And that was the moment when we discovered that Peter's father had killed himself. And we knew we needed to talk to Peter about it, but we also knew it was going to not be the most comfortable conversation, because if it had to be uncovered for us by an archivist, we knew it wasn't something that was, at the top of Peter's tongue or on the tip of his tongue.
My recollection, Peter, when we asked him something, I can't recall a time when he flat out said, "I won't talk about that."
He never did.
He would look uncomfortable and be uncomfortable. He would answer it in a way that was respectful and informative, but not beyond a certain point of volubility, because Peter's professional. Above all things, he's professional. So the professional thing would be to answer the question, but not feel like he had to go at length.
And he clearly was in that one scene. He really was. It was quite an emotional moment. You could see that in the film. And he also was very revealing about Gordon. Was that hard too for him to talk about?
That actually became part of his show, because the line where he says that is actually from his Bimbos show that we shot, where he says, Gordon, we lost Gordon in 2009, and unfortunately he didn't take care of himself, and the doctor's orders and everything. That's actually now in his show.
But we didn't.
Okay.
It's so clear, even early on, Cooch saying Gordon loved to get drunk, chase chicks. It wasn't necessary to go into any alcohol problems and things like that with Gordon, because it's so self-evident at that point.
I mean, Gordon says, in that interview that Keith luckily did and then was kind enough to give to us, Gordon says, "Look, I wish that I could say that I felt bad about it, but I had so much fun being an asshole."
Right. Yeah, that interview was really amazing. I had not seen that before, and it was astonishing to hear him that honest. The bit with Steve Martin at the beginning was wonderful. Was there a lot more of that on the cutting room floor?
Oh, yeah, of course.
Of course.
Yes.
But what I really most is that from the beginning, we thought it would be really interesting to have them play some music together. And Steve, through his manager, was quick to say, yes, sure, that sounds great. Peter was so reserved about it, and just thought it was worried Steve was forced into it, which he was not at all. And then I think then Peter was saying, but I don't banjo chords and I don't know, those songs. And he said, it's noodling around a little bit. He said, I don't know. He brought his guitar up when we filmed in Santa Barbara, sort of grudgingly. And then they had the greatest time. And afterward, they said, no, this was so much fun. We really enjoyed noodling around together. So,
I know. I think one thing that I feel like I learned from working with Peter for those few years that we were filming is that sometimes in his head, he doesn't want to do something, but then like you just leave it out there. So with the Steve Martin thing, at first he didn't even want to, he was like, why do you want me to be in the interview with Steve? And we're like, because you guys are such good friends. It'll be something different. It'll be refreshing, way better than just sitting him down and doing a talking head interview. And then he said, all right. And then we're like, Eddie, you need to bring your guitar. And then he was like, what? So we said, just bring your guitar and put it in the trunk of your car. And then Steve walked in like playing his banjo, basically. I mean, we had photos of him like literally walking into the house where we filmed when Steve's twiddling away on his banjo. And at that point, it was such a natural thing for Peter to whip out his guitar. And then it just unfolded really comfortably.
It's such a sweet moment.
Yeah.
There are so many other people. I mean, there's so many people that he has worked with. Ed Sheeran is another one. He just worked with Streisand. And when you go through the list of people he's worked with, it's an incredible list. I know it's going to be in New York and Los Angeles in June. It's doing the film festivals now.
It's going to be all around the country in June. So it's opening on the 19th of June in New York. And then starting on the 26th, it's going to go around the country. It'll definitely be in LA and
in the Bay Area. Just going to keep winding it and pushing it out now.
So, I mean, I feel quite confident it's going to be around the country in art houses and whatnot.
Is there any talk of DVD and Blu-ray at this point, or is that a little early?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we're thrilled with Greenwich Entertainment. First and foremost, it's get people into theaters because it is the most fun way to see it with big sound and big picture, the amplification of laughter and enjoyment. But they are going to make a Blu-ray, and then hopefully we'll just start noodling around with some dropped scenes and little outtakes that could be really fun for it.
I'm told there's a lot of dropped scenes. Is that true?
Oh, no, fair number. I mean,
fair number.
There are a fair number. But I mean, and then there's some that they're just like, well, at one point, one of the things that Peter did, in addition to managing James and Linda, and he also managed Joni Mitchell for a while. He was Pamela Anderson's manager, and we actually cut a scene. And during that time, it was in the early 2000s. One of the things he did for Pamela was get her into a reality TV show. And he was one of the stars of the show with her.
She dragged him into it.
Actually, the directors did, because we know one of the directors. He was like, no, Peter, you got to be in this because you're kind of holding it all together. So we have a scene that we cut where Peter talks about it and you see the reality show. It's quite funny. It just didn't end up fitting into the film per se.
But seeing the crosswalk behind you, we also shot, there's nowhere to put it, but it would be just a great DVD blip of a moment. We shot Peter and his daughter Victoria doing the Beatles walk, but the other direction. Watch them do the zebra crossing, and it's got to find a home somewhere.
But anyway, best of luck with the film. It's really, really wonderful. It's the tribute he really deserves.
I think so too.
And I think a lot of people are going to be educated, are going to learn a lot from this film. I sure learned a lot of things that I didn't know. Another part that I didn't mention was the reunion with Gordon, which you guys talk about. And he also talks about his passing that Peter comments on, which was hard for him too. But that reunion at, I believe it was BB King's, King's? And that was a huge thing. That was a huge moment. Paul Schaefer was behind. And and you guys talked to Paul Schaefer too.
Paul and Kathy, which I like because Kathy is the one who Paul was thinking that Peter would sort of shove it off and say, I don't want to do that. And Kathy was the one who said to Paul Schaefer, oh, come on, just call him. Kathy was a talent booker for years. So
for Saturday Night Live.
So she was not about to be deterred. And she pushed to go do it, which I think is wonderful.
Yeah, it was really fun to give Kathy her day in front of the camera alongside. Yeah, because I think that, I mean, Paul always had credited Kathy on paper, but it was fun to actually get the two of them together and have them talk through it. The other thing I wanted to say, for people who do want to go see it in a theater, the added benefit of that is that almost always when we've been there, now we've probably seen it, I don't know, a dozen times in different film festival situations. At that moment where Peter leads the Bimbos audience in World Without Love,
Right.
most times the theater audience breaks out as well. And you don't get that if you're watching it at home on a DVD.
Where else, if people are into film festivals, where else are you going to be?
So it's going to be tomorrow night it's in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and then it'll also be at the Cleveland Film Festival on Thursday afternoon. Then we are going to Winston-Salem for the River Run Film Festival this weekend. We're invited to a whole bunch coming up, but they don't announce until like a month ahead.
But I would say if you just do a search on Peter's name and the Peter Asher Everywhere Man, stuff will come up. And I think the website, peterashermovie.com, is about to go live next week as well.
The best way to find out is if people are on social media, if they sign on to follow the Peter Asher Everywhere Man, either Instagram or Facebook pages, it's updated like every hour. So they'll find out when it's coming.
Dan and Dayna, thank you very much for doing this.
Thank
Good
you.
to have fun at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much.
And one thing about the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, it's the home of the Asher family piano, which is the same piano that Peter talks about in his show, on which Paul and John wrote "I Want to Hold Your Hand."
In the permanent collection, it's now also part of the Beatles exhibition. That's there. I don't have 30 seats left for tomorrow night at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but Jeff Allen Ross is going to perform some songs after the movie's over there at the Rock Hall of Fame.
Okay. All right.
Anyway,
thank you so much.
Yeah.
Oh,
Okay.
You're welcome. Well, there we go. I do have two little bits of news. First of all, there is a new Beatles podcast that will soon join the ranks, and it's hosted by none other than Miss Odell, Chris Odell. I don't have any information on when it'll start. Also, KYA, which is on the web and is based in San Francisco, years ago ran a special on the Candlestick Park show with audio, and they are fixing the audio to that show. We'll watch out for that, and when we get more news from that, we will let you know. That's all for today. We hope you enjoyed the show. If you are a first-time visitor and you like what you saw, we hope you will subscribe. Please do. It helps us a lot. Give us a like on the video because that also helps us with YouTube, and we would very much appreciate that. Shows are based on topics that you want to talk about. So if you want to suggest something, write to Beatles News Briefs at gmail.com, and we'll certainly give it a look. And if you like what we did today and you want to comment on YouTube, please do. We would appreciate seeing your comments. So that's about it. Thanks again. And in the words of number 6, Patrick McGowan, be seeing you.
Be seeing you.
Keep that one. Mark it fab.